look real close, you can see bait fish in a big old school. Something must be chasing them. Today I want to talk to you about time lapses, and more specifically I want to give you 3 tips for how to make your time lapse videos pop just a little bit more so you can drop them in as transitions or B-roll or even post them to social media just as they are. If you look around my channel long enough, you will notice that I love time lapses. I have loved time lapses since I got my first GoPro back in 2013. It was a Hero 3 Plus Black, and it was the first camera that I owned where it made it really easy to film time lapses outside of sitting there and going shutter, shutter, shutter. And while it made it easier to film the time lapses, it didn't necessarily make it any easier to create riveting time lapses. I was still really bad at making time lapses, and it had less to do with the technology of ending up with hundreds if not thousands of frames, and had more to do with the fact that I didn't really know what made a good subject for time lapses. I thought I did. I was doing a lot of time lapses of clouds from the building that I worked in, but it was all about just trying to figure out what makes a good subject, whether it be a regular video or even a time lapse. And Casey Neistat said something a few years ago in one of his videos that has really stuck with me, and I agree with it to an extent, but I also disagree with it to an extent. And that is that nobody gives a shit about your time lapses. And what he was saying is people don't want to watch videos of just time lapses. They want more substance. They want an actual story. And to an extent, I agree. There are times and places where people want to watch nothing but time lapses, but there are also times where people want more story. They want more substance. But I'm also one of those that I love watching time lapses just for the time lapse. I want to know what interval did they shoot at? Did they use a slider? What other materials did they use? How long did they have to be in location to get that particular flower to bloom just right? I have questions, I need answers, and I love watching time lapses. And I know that there are some of you out there who do too. I'm currently being judged by a little blue or green heron, I'm not sure which, but he is definitely judging me for making a video out here on this pier, but we're going to continue. Now that I've been creating more and more YouTube videos in the last year, and also watching more and more YouTube videos in the last year, I've come up with my own 3 tips that will help you add spice to your time-lapse videos. And those 3 tips are: take your time, choose the correct interval, and add movement. So let's take a couple minutes to look at each of these 3 tips individually, and the first one is take your time. And by that I mean plan to be somewhere for a relatively long time. When you're shooting time lapses, just because you've been somewhere for 5 minutes does not mean you're going to end up with a 5-minute clip. If you do a 1-second interval, you're still going to end up with a shorter clip than the 5 minutes you were there. I generally shoot most of my time lapses around 2-second intervals, and if I'm somewhere for 15 to 20 minutes, then I usually end up with a 5 to 6 second clip. That kind of shows you what you're up against. So if you're looking to do a 5, 10 second, or 30 second interval, then you need to plan to be somewhere for relatively an hour probably, if not longer. I really learned about this patience when I was doing more videos with Cliff Williams and Argyle Multimedia. We would go into the mountains and he would want us to stay somewhere for between 20, 30, 45 minutes so that we could get a 20 or 30 second clip of clouds moving through the mountains and things like that. And he really taught me that you have to take your time. You just have to be patient, because when you're dealing with these longer intervals or even the shorter intervals, you want to make sure that you get everything you need and that you don't end up with a little blip. And speaking of intervals, tip number 2 is choose the correct interval for what you're doing. You gotta look at what you are filming. If you are filming traffic, or if you're doing fast moving clouds, things of that nature, things that are changing really quickly, you want a shorter interval, 1 second, 2 second, up to 5. If you're doing things that take a lot more time, whether that be a building being built, a flower blooming, slow moving clouds, then you can do a 5, 10 second, 30 second interval, and you'll end up with a very similar look. But even then, if you look at a 2-second interval of the same thing as a 10-second interval, you do start to see some choppiness and some difference. So you just have to choose what interval you think is going to work perfectly for what it is that you're filming.
Still standing guard? Am I doing okay? Thumbs up, beak down? Okay.
Cool. And as for number 3, I said you need to add movement. And by that, I don't mean you have to get a slider, you don't have to do pans and slides, you don't have to do zoom in, zoom outs. You can add movement and infer movement by adding blur. And I really learned a lot about this from Peter Lindgren with some of his videos, where he took the shutter speed down rather than taking it up to get that motion blur that you really like seeing in some instances. So the easiest way to add motion to your time lapses is through blur. And what you do is you go from, right now I'm shooting at a shutter of 160 because I'm shooting 30 frames per second and I want this to look like a good video. But then but if I want to do a time lapse and show blur of the boats or of birds or of the waves, then I'll start dropping that shutter speed down to 1/5 to half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds. And you may say, well, that's well and good when it's dark out or when there's a lot more clouds, but on a day like today where it's bright sunshine, it can be a lot more difficult. And that's where you have to just be mindful and choose the correct equipment. I am using an ND filter here. You can darken the subject or you can lighten it, and then you can get it back to where it needs to be. Using variable ND filters like this one will help you to darken the subject enough to where you can drop the shutter speed and still see that motion blur, whether it be of waves or traffic, people in Grand Central Station, that kind of thing. But back to it, if you have a slider, you can add in that motion of the pan or the slide to the side. And if you don't have it though, if you do like some people and film in 4K, 6K, 8K, whatever your camera can film in, the largest quality, you can then zoom in a little bit and you can do a fake pan or slide. And I know that it's not the best and it doesn't always look the best, but it's a case of make do with what you have. And since you've made it this far, here's a little bonus tip. Try using all of your devices at one time to make better use of your time. This was something that I learned from both Casey Neistat and Peter Lindgren, and that's when you're somewhere filming a time lapse already, whether you're going to do B-roll, transition, like I said, whatever you're doing, set your main camera up to get the focal point, but then use your cell phone, use a GoPro, use a second or third camera to get the time lapse of a different angle, whether that be the same subject, something facing the completely other way. This is just one of those cases where you just make the best use of your time, because like I said, you're going to be in a location for a relatively long amount of time and you don't want to waste that time. So get multiple angles of multiple things so that when you get back, you've got everything you need. And I try to do this with all my videos, but I really did this a lot when I did my busy weekend vlog. I had the RP, the GoPro, the Insta360 Go 2, and my camera phone all shooting time lapses at the same time in several locations. That way, as I was heading out to the soccer field or when I was at the regatta, I was able to do a lot more with my little bit of limited time that I had to get my time lapses. And I was then able to have the multiple angles and go, that one just didn't turn out right. I like that one, maybe I'll save it for something else. And you just end up with a lot more material than you originally planned, or if you just used one camera. There you have it. Those are my top 4 tips for making your time lapses better, for giving them more spice, for bringing the sauce, for making them a little more creamier, a little more interesting. If you like this video, you should check out my comparison video of time lapses between the Canon EOS R, the GoPro Hero 10, the Insta360 Go 2, and my Samsung Galaxy S9. As always, please don't forget to like this video. I really do greatly appreciate it. If you don't already, hit subscribe, maybe ring that bell and set notifications so you know when I upload another video, and I'll catch you in another video on down the road.